What's going on, everybody? Welcome in to the Matchup Show special edition here as we cover the Thanksgiving Day games and the Black Friday game. So 4 games, which means we're going very in-depth. Before we get started, shout out Stump already in here. And, I really could have. For the special edition, I could have been in my recliner, but no, I am just here at my desk. I'm making sure that I'm ready because I haven't looked at these games yet. So we're going to be doing all of this analysis on the fly. But some special announcements, first and foremost, housekeeping stuff. In terms of articles this week, there will be no 10 under 10%, since that is a usual Friday article, but all of the Saturday articles will still be there. So Two Guns Core, Sam's Core, my hot takes, and hot takes might be a little bit longer than usual. Might give some honorable mentions and just talk through some other matchup stuff for the main slate, since I won't have the 10 under 10% article, but we're getting the main slate matchups are going the main slate matchups show, if you will, except it's for the Thanksgiving Day games and that Friday game. And also a reminder, this show isn't about DFS salaries. It's not about ownership. All we're doing is diving into the actual matchups and trying to figure out who is poised to outproduce their typical production or underproduce their typical production. And then we can just kind of go from there, whether it's the props or DFS, just kind of taking that analysis for what it is. And of course, before we get started, you can see at the top of the screen, we have debuted our contest sims for this week. Actually, it's not quite live yet. You might be able to use it on site now. I know they were planning on deploying the new optimizer that goes along with it right after NBA lock today. So it might be up already. Yes, there also will be a For the Millie tomorrow at 5:30 Eastern. If you're watching this sometime later in the week, tomorrow is Wednesday. So Wednesday, 5:30 Eastern, For the Millie, going over. That's going to be primarily just about the Thursday main slate for DraftKings, but we will also mix in some props and pick'em talk for those 3 games and for the Black Friday game. Probably won't touch on many main slate stuff. So what I will say is, as you're watching along, if you're over on Twitter, make sure you go over to the YouTube chat. Watch this on YouTube. I believe you can find that YouTube link either on the tweet below if you're watching on Twitter, or you can just go to the FTN Fantasy Twitter account or my Twitter account at AlexBlickle1 to find that link. And if you guys have any questions live, particularly later on in the show, if we have some extra time at the end, ask me about any individual matchup, ask me about any specific game for the main slate. We can also do some of that. But yeah, contest sims. So Zach and I talked a lot about contest sims on the Daily Dime earlier today. So I don't want to just kind of rehash all of that, but biggest things to note, the contest sims are going to be extremely, extremely easy to use. That's been one of our main focuses with contest sims is how can we make it easier to use than a lot of the existing contest sims around the industry? I think we've done exactly that. It's just ingrained in the optimizer. You build your lineups just as you always have in the optimizer, and then you just have to hit one button. Run sims, you choose the contest that you want, run sims, and now it's going to tell you your ROI, your expected ROI, your expected top 0.1% rate with that lineup, the expected cash rate with the lineup, and hopefully by the start of tomorrow's games or maybe next week, I don't know exactly when they'll be able to get to it, but I also convinced them to add in top 1% finishes for single entry players who, top 0.1% doesn't mean a whole lot to me when I'm in a contest with 277 people, and first place is the top 0.36%, not top 0.1. So we'll have that in there for single entry players sooner than later. Some really exciting stuff there. And again, I don't want to talk too much about it. Number one, I already have a Contest Sims 101 article coming out tomorrow morning, and then we'll also record a Contest Sims tutorial video tomorrow morning where we can discuss this further. But main advantage for us here with Contest Sims is our ownership advantage that we have over the industry. Contest Sims, for those that you're not familiar, essentially you are literally simulating the entire DFS contest, which begins with predicting the lineups that your competition is going to use. And you have no chance of predicting the lineups your competition is going to use if you can't predict ownership in a reliable way. And when you look around the industry kind of fails when it comes to ownership projections. A lot of big misses. We have a huge advantage in ownership. It is the most accurate ownership in the industry. And importantly, it's not that we are just a little bit more accurate across the board and that adds up to a big advantage. It's also that we are the most accurate when we are the most different from the rest of the industry. So perfect example this past week came from Jaden Daniels, where the industry had him around 14% on average as the second most popular quarterback. We had him the sixth most popular quarterback, under 6% in single entries. Sure enough, he came in 3%, 6%, 8%, 4%, depending on the exact contest you were in. Obviously, ended up being a fantastic sack. Of course, got a little bit lucky with that long Terry McLaurin touchdown at the end, but then got unlucky that he didn't get overtime because his damn kicker missed the extra point. So that ownership is a perfect example of how the way in which we are more accurate than everybody else actually really matters, and it's going to matter even more now that we have these contest sims and we're better able to predict the field that we are competing against. So I am incredibly pumped to see how these do. I put this in the tutorial article so you guys can read about it as well, but one of my lineups this past week was a Jaden Daniels stack, and when I went back and looked at what the optimizer would have told me to do and what the sims would have told me to do with that Jaden Daniels stack, it would have landed me on a lineup with 207 points and taken down every single contest. So it's a damn shame we didn't have it about 4 days sooner, but I'm pumped for what it's going to produce for us the rest of the season. All right, that's enough of that. Oh, actually, there is one more thing I need to mention. We have 2 promo codes going on. BKVIP for 25% off the NFL VIP Plus and VIP Plus subscriptions, or BK20 for 20% off all other subscriptions except for baseball. Fantasy baseball packages have their own promotion going on right now. I do not know the promo code. You will definitely be able to find that at Vlad's Twitter account at RotoGut. So go look at that if you are interested. He has produced a phenomenal fantasy baseball product, and I know I saw the other day that they are bringing back every single guy on the team from last year. So pretty awesome stuff that Vlad is doing. Check those out. And of course, if you're here watching, you probably want the VIP package. So BK VIP, BK is for Black Friday. I thought that it meant Marshall was just a big fan of Burger King, but no, it stands for Black Friday. So BK VIP, 25% off NFL VIP Plus and VIP Plus packages. All right, let's jump in. I'm going to share StatsHub here, and let's start talking about these games. I'm going to leave this promo code up on the screen throughout. If you guys have any questions about the promo codes, drop those in the comments or just hit me up afterwards. You can DM me. I can already anticipate some of the questions like, hey, can I as an existing subscriber still use this promo code to maybe renew early or something like that? I don't know the exact answer. I'm in the process of getting that answer. Hopefully I'll be able to answer all those questions for you guys sooner than later. So if you have them, DM me. And I think that's going to be the easiest way to do it. If you're not an FTN subscriber already, you can DM me on Twitter at AlexBlickle1. If you are, just do it in Discord. That's the easiest way to contact me. All right, let's finally now dive in. We're going to start with Detroit and Chicago. And actually, I'm going to start in the adjusted line yards section here. So I'm on defenses, and I want to point this out right away because this is a fantastic rushing matchup, but we're going to go real in depth on this rushing matchup. So Chicago, 27th in adjusted line yards allowed, 26th in open field yards allowed. Immediately, that means very good things for David Montgomery and especially Jahmyr Gibbs. So now let me jump over to StatsHub, and you know where I want to go. I want to go to these explosive yards allowed, and Chicago has allowed the 8th most explosive rushing yards and the 8th highest explosive rushing rate. So both of those things are great for Jahmyr Gibbs, but let's take this one more step. Because we only have 4 games, 8 teams to really dive into on this show, let's see just how detailed we can get. So one of the awesome things here about StatsHub, we can go to rushing advanced players. And now I'm going to just search by Detroit to make this nice and easy on myself. And I want to look at the different schemes. So David Montgomery uses inside zone 33% of the time compared to 28.6% for Jahmyr Gibbs. Both use man around 15 to 20%, 14% for Gibbs, 19% for David Montgomery, and then 43% outside zone for Jahmyr Gibbs, 19% outside, or 35% outside zone for David Montgomery. So we're not learning a ton here, but this 42.9% outside zone rate is quite high. If we look at every single team, we can see that outside zone rate, as you can see, Atlanta loves their outside zone, then Alvin Kamara, and then Jahmyr Gibbs 4th in outside zone rate. So I am particularly interested in how Chicago defends the outside zone. So let's do that. Let's go to defense. And now we're going to go to advanced filtering, rushing, run concepts. We're going to go outside zone here. And now I want to evaluate this in a few ways. Number one, I want to see, are they allowing explosive plays in the outside zone game? So we're going to find Chicago not near the top, 18th, only 6 explosive runs from outside zone so far this season, 12th in rate. So it's not like they're fantastic against it, and then they're going to be way down, 23rd in overall yards. Sometimes that doesn't mean a whole lot. That can just mean that they haven't played teams who have used it a bunch, or they don't have that great of rushers in the outside zone. We can also look at success rate here. So Chicago is quite good here, allowing just a 31.1% success rate against the outside zone. And finally, let's look at yards per carry. They're also probably going to look pretty good here. So not the greatest matchup, 23rd, here at just 3.6 yards per carry against outside zone. So this isn't like a phenomenal matchup by any means for Jahmyr Gibbs. We did just see Indianapolis was kind of the exact same way, where they were defending outside zones well, but really getting shredded by inside zones. And so actually what we saw from Detroit was they just used a lot of inside zones, and that's where Gibbs broke off a couple big runs. So it's not by any means the end of the world for Gibbs. He can still break off some explosives. The most important thing far and away is just, does the team allow explosive runs? Because Detroit can hit them in any way, especially with Gibbs. But if he was going up against Washington or New Orleans, that would really signal a fantastic spot, because they do not defend this outside zone well. Also worth noting, let's see. Carolina, no surprise, near the top. New England, let's look by the rate. So Houston, Washington, once again up there. Pittsburgh, New England. So those would be like the perfect matchups, but this is still a very good one for Gibbs. And it also means that Montgomery has a chance of breaking off some explosives himself, since most of these explosives against the Chicago team are not coming from outside zone, which they have actually defended pretty well. So I think that'll cover it for those guys. This is definitely going to be a big question for this 3-game slate. Monty and Gibbs pairing might be the play. Honestly, this is a fantastic example of something that the Sims are going to handle really, really well. I've talked about this already earlier today. Actually, we used this exact example. Zach asked me about pairing these guys together. The Sims are going to do a really good job at understanding the more complex correlations that we know that they're kind of competing with each other, but we're not exactly sure which one wins. So in this case, it's Monty and Gibbs are definitely inversely correlated to some degree, in the sense that whenever Gibbs scores a touchdown, Monty's not scoring that touchdown, and vice versa. But there's also the instance of what about the game environment and just the overall success of the offense. If they're scoring 1 million points, if they are scoring a lot more and moving the ball with ease in a way that teams really haven't been able to do against Chicago this season, now all of a sudden both Montgomery and Gibbs are going to have scoring opportunities. They're probably both part of the reason they are driving down the field. If Chicago is really taking away the receivers and forcing Jared Goff to check down to whichever running back is on the field at that time, they're both going to get some reception. So there are ways in which they're positively correlated. There are ways in which they're negatively correlated. The Sims are going to understand that better than our simple little human brains can do. And they will also do a great job of telling us, if we are using them together, what should the rest of those lineups look like? If we are choosing just one of the two, what should the rest of those lineups look like? So that's the kind of thing that I'm especially interested in using the Sims for. But in the meantime, let's take a look at some of the other stuff from this matchup. And I apologize if this was too small. I'm going to blow it up for the rest of the way. So here in chat, if you ever see something on the screen, if I do something dumb like I did last week where I forget that I'm sharing the wrong tab, just let me know in the live YouTube chat. And you can also let me know if you want me to blow up the text anymore because you're having trouble seeing it. If you're watching on your phone, it's going to be especially tough to see some of this stuff. So I recommend watching on a laptop, but hey, we all have busy lives, especially at this time of year. So if you're watching on your phone, I'm trying to talk through everything I see as well. So even if you can only listen and not watch, you're still getting all of this great information. But all right, let's look at some of the passing stuff. Let me bring up the DVOA adjusted passing, or the DVOA adjusted fantasy points against data. Let's take a look at Chicago. They've been a terrible matchup for quarterbacks, 24% less production than average or than usual allowed by this Chicago team. bad matchup for wide receivers, especially bad matchup for wide receiver ones, negative 32%. That is the worst matchup in the entire league for wide receiver ones. Amon-Ra St. Brown is not your typical wide receiver one. He runs different routes. He gets moved around a lot. So he's not necessarily in a terrible spot, but I think it's just kind of clear that all of these guys are going to have a difficult time, which is why I really do like these running backs quite a bit. Negative 8% for tight ends, negative 9 and negative 8% for wide receiver 2s and wide receiver 3. So regardless of who it is and what role they have in the passing game, this is a tough spot for them all. But let's see if there's anything in Chicago's data that can point us to one Detroit Lion pass catcher over the other. So let me clear all of these filters. I'm going to make this even a little bit bigger. Now we're going to go to passing. Actually, sorry, I want to go to receiving first. I want to go to advanced in the receiving section, defense, and now we're going to scroll over here and take a look at the single high rates, man coverage, 2 high rates, and zone coverage rates for the Chicago team. This is kind of how I start all of my analysis. Let's see. So they are not playing a lot of single high. Are they playing a ton of 2 high? 14th and 2 high, so nothing there. How about man and zone coverages? All right, maybe zone. They're 24th in man rate and then 11th in zone rate. So maybe we want to target some zone heavy guys, guys with just favorable zone splits instead of man splits, but there's really nothing crazy here. Typically when we're doing this, we want to look for the outliers, the teams at the extremes. 11th in zone rate is by no means extreme. So we can potentially find something here, but note that this is not going to be a very strong take. So let me just go here and we're going to filter receiving coverages and we're going to go look at the zone filter and just take a look at which Detroit guys pop. We've looked at Detroit a couple times the last few weeks. So if you have been tuning in the last couple weeks, you already know who's going to pop a little bit more than the rest. But here we have 2.6 yards per route run for David Montgomery against zone, 2.4 for Amon-Ra St. Brown, 2.1 for Jameson Williams, 1.6 for Sam Laporta. So nothing crazy here. This is kind of just the order by which they typically show up. So again, really nothing specific about this, which means it's not like there's nothing to take away from that. It just means that when we see ownership, we can really kind of play the ownership game with this Detroit receiving corps. If Jameson Williams slips through the cracks and is 9% owned, let's go play Jameson Williams. If absolutely nobody wants to pay up for Amon-Ra St. Brown because they are perceiving this as a really difficult matchup, let's play Amon-Ra St. Brown. But the right answer might just be play David Montgomery and or Jahmyr Gibbs in this slate. So time to move to Detroit. And I definitely just did the thing where I left it on DVOA, didn't I? Yes, I did. So let me just bring this up so you guys can see. Here is the yards per route run data. And the way I found this is going advanced filtering, receiving, coverages, and then switching man zone to zone and applying that and then putting on the Detroit filter. So that's how we get here. All right, let's look at the matchup now for Chicago against Detroit. We know what the DVOA adjusted fantasy points against data is going to look like for this Detroit team. It's been the exact same all season, where they are a bad matchup for everybody except wide receivers, where they're giving up a ton of production. Not necessarily that the secondary is bad. They do allow a bunch of yardage. It's mostly just teams have to throw a ton. And the reason why wide receivers are doing really well, but quarterbacks aren't, is because it's mostly just a yardage thing and not a touchdowns thing. Quarterbacks are having trouble getting the ball into the end zone. Also why running backs are having such a tough time, and they have been fantastic against tight ends. So I think I will be more interested in some of these Chicago receivers in the props side of thing and pick them over on underdog or pick six, more so than I will be interested in them for actual DFS purposes. But again, if ownership points us in that direction, I will accept it. So let's see if we can find some coverage stuff that points us in the direction of any of the Chicago wide receivers. Probably not even going to bother looking at DeAndre Swift unless he's popping in the receiving stuff. I certainly don't think he's going to find any success on the ground. He can't find success against the ground against mediocre run defenses more often than not. Once again, near the bottom of the rushing yards over expected leaderboard this season. So, all right, let's look. Receiving advanced, I want defense. I want to clear out these filters. Might need a refresh here. No, it looks like we're actually good here. All right, so single high. Where is Detroit? They are 16th. That's dead center. Too high. 13th, pretty much dead center. I believe they're high in man coverage. Yeah, 6th in man coverage rate. So we can take a look at that. Let's go look at which Chicago wide receivers are doing the best against man coverage. Receiving, player, advanced filtering, receiving, coverages, man zone to man, and we're going to apply that. And now I'm going to filter by the Chicago Bears. Yards per route run data is what I always like to look at. You see Rome Odunze topping the board at 1.5, then Keenan Allen at 1.4, DJ Moore way down at 0.8. I don't just want to look at these raw numbers. I also want to look at how it compares to zone. So again, we're looking for who's producing more than their typical production or less than their typical production. So let's take a look. 1.5, 1.4, and 0.8. DeAndre Swift at 1.0, probably not going to mean much of anything. Let's switch the coverages to zone now. Apply that. We will see 1.7 for DJ Moore. So 1.7 to 0.8. This is a bad matchup for DJ Moore. 1.4 for Rome Odunze, and then 0.9 for Keenan Allen. That goes up to 1.4 with Keenan. So might be a spot to go right back to Keenan after a pretty big week last week. And then Rome Odunze kind of emerging as potentially their best receiver, certainly their most efficient, most consistently efficient, I should say, and really kind of rising of late in terms of yards per run. In fact, why don't we just do that as well? So let me get rid of this coverage filter. I'll leave it on Chicago, and I'm just going to sort by yards per route run. So you can see, like on the season, DJ Moore, Rome Odunze are tied. But if we start to just look at the most recent weeks, let's look at the last 3 games, for example, 12, 11, and 10. Now we see, okay, so 1.6. Oh, look at that, DJ Moore. I misspoke. So sometimes it makes sense to just kind of check all our work. So DJ Moore 1.6, Keenan Allen 1.4, Rome Odunze down at 1.1, which was largely, I believe, because week 12 was the Keenan Allen week, and DJ Moore also had a nice one. You can see Keenan Allen, 15 targets this past week. 86 yards, and the DJ Moore 7 for 106. Rome Odunze 10 targets, but only turned those 10 into 5 for 39 touchdowns for each. DJ Moore and Keenan Allen as well. So pretty solid week for DJ Moore, but now it's a very difficult matchup for him, a much better matchup for Keenan Allen. So I will probably be heavy on Keenan Allen this week, at least in the props department. All right, I think it's time to go to the next game. Actually, you know what I want to do? I mentioned this last week. I like to look at blitz stats as well, and we haven't really looked at blitz stats on this show, so we're going to do exactly that right now. What I want to do is make sure I'm clearing all the filters, passing. What's going on here? Passing, pressure, and I want to sort by defense first. And now I'm going to sort by blitz rate, and I want to see which defenses really blitz. So is Detroit or Chicago near the top? Detroit is 11th. That's not crazy high. Chicago not blitzing a lot at 26th. So there's not a ton to look at here, but you could do the exact same thing. So whether you want to look at how the quarterback does against blitz sets, you can go to passing, advanced, and then you go to advanced filtering, passing. And here you see pressure or verse blitz. Turn verse blitz to true. So I said, I said Detroit was 11th in blitz rate. So I believe Caleb might be struggling this year against the blitz. Don't quote me on that. We're going to find out in a second. But if that's the case, we might find a spot where, okay, Detroit is really going to try and tee off on that and blitz him a lot. So here we have passing, advanced filtering. Now I'm going to scroll all the way to the right, and I'm going to look at DYAR and DVOA. This data is phenomenal. It's especially good in small samples, which we are kind of getting when we look at just the filter for blitz data. So let's take a look at how Caleb Williams is performing in this regard this season. You can see 25th, -2 DYAR, -11.4% DVOA. So as I thought, not doing too hot against the blitz. That is, did I miss it? 25th among NFL quarterbacks this season in DVOA. So We might see Detroit really try and attack them that way. So let's see if we can figure out which of the receiving options have performed best against the blitz for the Chicago team. Yards per route run, and here we go. DeAndre Swift suddenly comes up, 2.0 yards per route run, 1.7 for Rome, 1.5 for DJ Moore. Surprisingly, only 1.1 for Keenan Allen. I was actually expecting Keenan to be the guy in this regard, but I think they've probably caught teams in the blitz with some DJ Moore screens. So I think that's probably where he is getting the most. But let's also notice we're talking about 2021 and 21 targets this year. So this is a pretty small sample. I don't want to take too much stock in this. Let's see. From a DYAR perspective, 47 for Rome, 18 for DJ Moore, negative 38 for Keenan. So they have not been successful targeting Keenan when blitzed at all. Maybe throws a little bit of a wrench in there. I will do some more digging after the show and kind of give my final thoughts in the Discord. Essentially, what I want to see is, number one, has Caleb Williams shown any improvement over the last few weeks against the blitz? In fact, you know what? Let's just go ahead and do that. We've got time here. So player advanced. What did we say? He was at -2 and -11% on the season. Let's look at the last 2 weeks since we've gotten the coordinator change. And sure enough, Caleb Williams, look how much better he has been against the blitz. A lot of that I'm sure of is on these quick screens, just trying to get rid of the ball quicker. So this might be a really cool finding, actually. Now let's go look at who has really benefited from this in terms of the wide receivers. So 3.3 yards per route run for Keenan Allen. That is an awesome number. 4.3 for DeAndre Swift. That's only on 7 routes, though, so we don't want to take too much stock in that. It's literally 1 reception on 1 target. Keenan, 5 of 8 for 66 and a score. DJ Moore scored on that screen pass, so 4 of 4 targets for 58 and a score. And then Adunze, 3 for 21 on 4 targets. So this brings me right back to Keenan. This is actually a great sign. I think Keenan might be in for a really big day. So I might have some interest in the DFS side. I will definitely have some interest on the prop side. I don't know if we've gotten any props yet for these Thursday games. Let me take a quick look and see. We do have some Keenan Allen stuff. So 51.5 is his receiving yards line. It's actually a little bit higher than I expected it to be. 19.5 longest reception, 4.5 reception. So probably some interest in that 51.5 receiving yards, but it is a little bit higher than I expected. So I'm not going to call that one of my absolute favorites just yet. Let's see what else we have here. All right. Let's see how Goff has done against the blitz, or even against no blitz, because we saw Chicago was 26th in blitz rate. Okay, so let me get rid of this filter. Actually, I want to go to Detroit, and I can leave that blitz filter on here. We're just doing the exact same analysis. Passing, advanced. Oh, I did want to switch that filter, though. First blitz to false. And 8.4 yards per attempt. He has been pretty awesome all season. 441 DYAR, 17.2% DVOA. That is a great number, as we know. Let's just see real quick how that compares to when he's blitzed. So it goes up to 21.4% DVOA. DYAR is a counting stat, so it should go up as long as he's not doing really, really poorly when blitzed. So 21.4% DVOA overall, which means his blitz DVOA is slightly better, but still quite good. And now let's go to receiving, and let's see if we can find anything on these guys. So first blitz, 2 false. And like some of the time when a quarterback is in blitz, you're going to find he has more time and is able to throw the ball deep. Other quarterbacks are going to be the opposite. They're going to have a wide receiver who's really, really good when given one-on-one coverage. You're more likely to get one-on-one coverage when the opponent blitzes. So he's going to have actually a longer or a further higher average depth of target when blitzed than not. We saw that a bunch with Joe Burrow a couple years ago when he was just shredding teams when they were blitzing because he was just consistently going deep to Jamar Chase single coverage. Teams learned pretty quickly not to do that too often. But let's see here. Yards per route run. Oh, I'm in base. That's why. Amon-Ra St. Brown, 2.9. So now we see some real separation versus some of these other guys, 2.9 yards per run to 1.8 second in Jamison Williams. So I'm going to go back to what I said kind of at the start, just looking at the DVOA data. Negative 32% for wide receiver ones looks awful, but Amon-Ra St. Brown is not your typical wide receiver one. And to that point, let's go one step further. You guys can probably tell, this is how I do the research, right? Just as soon as a thought comes in my head, I just go check it. You can do the exact same thing, look at all this stuff yourself. What I want to do now is I want to look at route location coming from the slot. I mentioned that Amon-Ra St. Brown is not your typical wide receiver one. A main reason for that is because of how many routes he runs out of the slot. Check this out, 158 on the season. Interestingly, his yards per route run is actually a lot higher out wide. Jamison Williams really producing out of the slot at 2.4 yards per route run. So now let's see, is the Chicago defense a little bit more vulnerable out of the slot than they are overall? The yards per route run allowed, they are, looks like they're doing pretty well. 16th, 8.1. That is not a terrible number by any stretch of the imagination. Let's see here, 22nd in yards. But if we get rid of that filter, I believe they're going to look even better. So you can see total yards allowed, already sorting by that. Instead of 23rd overall, they are 22nd in yards per route run. Instead of 16th at like 8.1, they are 9th at, or 9th highest at 7.1. Okay. So you know what? Maybe again, like this is not quite as bad of a matchup as I initially expected it to be. So I think potentially number one, it looks like pass volume is an issue against this team, but Detroit doesn't ever have a ton of pass volume. So I think I'm hopeful that one of Jamison Williams or Amon-Ra St. Brown is really going to slip through the cracks and people just want to play the running backs, which most people just looking at any kind of fantasy points against data, let alone our DVOA adjusted fantasy points against data, will probably lean towards the running backs. Either of these two receivers really slip through the cracks and have a low ownership, they're probably going to have a very high GPP score. Yes, we are going to have GPP scores this week for the Thanksgiving slate, and I will probably be interested in both of them. So, or in either one of them, I should say, whichever one really slips through the cracks. All right. What is next? That pretty much covers Chicago and Detroit. Oh, I do not want to talk too much about New York and Dallas. One thing I will say, if it's Drew Lock instead of Tommy DeVito, you might have a difficult time talking me out of a giant stack. I think Drew Lock would produce pretty well at $4,500, would also make Malik Neighbors at $7,100 a lot more interesting. So just in the case that is what we see, let's look at some of this data. Let's go DVOA adjusted fantasy points against data first. Dallas, great matchup for quarterbacks, great matchup for running backs, better matchup for wide receiver twos than wide receiver ones. That's an interesting finding. Negative 17% for posting tight ends. So maybe this is a Wandale week. Maybe it's a Slayton week as well. It could be. I'm not sure exactly which one we have designated as the wide receiver two. Wandale, obviously, wide receiver two in terms of target share and first read targets and things of that nature, but he's operating more from the slot. So sometimes we'll give that designation to the second outside wide receiver. We'll take a look at what we can find here. So let's go to receiving advanced defense. Let's get rid of all of the filters. I think we already have gotten rid of them, but just to be sure. And let's go look at this data. So how often is Dallas playing single high? We have New York playing the fourth most single high, so we're going to keep that in our back pocket. Make sure we are looking at that for Dallas. Dallas not playing a lot of single high. They are probably playing a lot of two high. Not as much as I expected. Did I miss them? Where? 23rd in both? Does that make sense? They must be playing a lot of combo coverage if that is the case. Yeah, they're going to play a ton of combo coverage. We probably have them charted as the most combo coverage, which means single high or man on one side, zone on the other. So it just gets kind of messy. It's hard to chart as one or the other. It's also possible that they are doing some zero blitz stuff. They are not. 18th. Okay. Let's look at man rates for Dallas and New York. 18th and 16th, so they're going to be middle of the pack here. So really the only thing that stands out on either team is how much single high New York is playing. And to that point, we can go to passing and air yards, and we can see New York is allowing a ton of these deep completions. Fifth in total deep completions. They have allowed by far, the highest completion percentage on those deep completions, 19 of 25 on throws 20 plus yards downfield. That is insane. And that has resulted in only 580. That is 10th most deep receiving yards. Dallas 12th most deep receiving yards, but nothing special in any of this data. Actually, the total percentage, fourth highest deep throw percentage against them. So when teams are throwing, they're throwing deep more often against Dallas than New York. So some stuff to find here, not a ton, but let's take a look at the receiving stuff. Number one, we want single high going up against New York, and we want the deep, who's catching those deep balls on Dallas. So let's go take a look at those two things. Advanced. And we can see against single high is the first thing that I want. So I'm going to go to the player, advanced filtering, receiving, coverages, shell coverage, single high, and apply that. And now we're getting all of the data. And I just want to go to Dallas here. Against single high, potential GPP winner here, Cavante Turpin, 3.0 yards per route run. This play would be very, very reminiscent to the Deshaun Jackson play a couple years ago when he was with Las Vegas and broke the slate against this very Dallas team. Look at this, CeeDee Lamb 2.5. Nobody else is even at 1.0. So very, very interesting here. Unfortunately, he's not running too many routes. So I don't want to be like too over the top on this because, yeah, 3.0 yards per route run is good, but the guy's not running many routes. So, in fact, I need to uncheck the qualified box to actually let him show up. Only 122 on the season. How many routes did he run here in week 12? I think it was really low. 6 routes, 8 yards. How about the week prior, week 11? 18 routes, 4.8. Okay, so actually was quite good the week prior. 3 for 86 on the touchdown. And I'm betting that touchdown was against single high. Let's see. We can test that. Coverages, shell coverage, single high. We are still only looking at that week 11 game. 2 for 80 in the score against single high. So this also might be a case of like he's only getting routes when the opponent is actually playing enough single high where they expect him to be on the field against that single high look, and then they look his way. So GPP winner right here, Cavante Turpin. And if they give us any kind of longest reception for him, I will also probably be interested in that. Although right now, all I see on Underdog is touchdown props for Turpin. So certainly won't be interested in those. And like I said, not really anything in the matchup even worth looking at for this Dallas team unless we find something in the blitz stats. So let's go there next. I'm going to clear that out. Let's look at passing, and then can't totally forget the running games here. We will look at that next, but first let's look at the pressure rates from these defenses, or actually the blitz rates for these defenses is what I want. And just a little kind of background information on these blitz stats. The reason why they are so effective is because blitz stats often shows us kind of a catch-22 position for a defense. Think about why teams blitz. Yeah, some just do it because they love doing it and they love creating that chaos, like these almost 40% blitz rates for Minnesota and Tampa Bay. But some teams blitz because they cannot pressure the quarterback. And they need some kind of pressure on the quarterback because they don't have the coverage to actually hold up if the opponent has a lot of time. The problem there is if the opposing quarterback is great against the blitz, now they put the defense in a catch-22 where they're going to carve you up if you blitz, but if you don't, now you're giving them all the time in the world to still carve you up. So that's why I really like looking at blitz stats. That was never more true than a few years ago. Cincinnati shredded Baltimore twice, even more so than they did this year. And that was largely because at the time, the Baltimore secondary was so banged up that all they could do was blitz and blitz and blitz, knowing they were going to give up explosive plays. But they just felt like, look, we're not going to be able to stop offenses from going gradually down the field, we may as well allow those explosives and try to create explosive plays ourselves by making them make mistakes. And consequently, Joe Burrow just sliced and diced them on the way to like 404 the first time they played. And Jamar Chase had over 200 yards and 2 touchdowns, maybe even 3 touchdowns. The next time they played, they didn't blitz as much. Burrow still covered them up that time. It was T. Higgins with the massive game. So we actually saw both sides of that catch-22. It's not always that cut and dry, but that's why I like looking at this stuff. So let's see where this New York and Dallas team is. Dallas 8th in blitz rate, so worth checking out where New York is going. Unfortunately, we don't have anywhere near enough data on the New York quarterback, whether it's DeVito or Drew Lock this week, but maybe we can still find something on the receiving end. I'm guessing Wan'Dale Robinson is going to pop here a little bit just because he's running so many of those shorter routes, but let's take a look. New York Giants, advanced filtering, receiving, verse blitz to true, apply that, and let's take a look at this yards per route run data. Nothing crazy, 2.0 for Malik Neighbors. 1.8 for Slayton is surprising. I wouldn't have expected that. And then 1.1 for Wan'Dale Robinson. Let's compare that to their usual numbers. So 2.0, 1.9, and 1.1. I need play situation, not coverages. 2.1 for Neighbors, 1.4 for Slayton, 1.3 for Wan'Dale. So Slayton really seeing a boost when teams blitz them. I don't know if that will continue, but Slayton will have some interest from me if it's Drew Lock, not if it's Tommy DeVito. But that's, I think, going to do it for the, I've been on DVOA all this time. You guys got to remind me. But here is this data. Just a reminder here. You go to advanced filtering, receiving, then you find verse blitz. So here in play situation, pressure, verse blitz, and you just go to true. And then you get the yards per run data for these guys against the blitz. So, all right, what is next? We want these rushing games. So let me bring up that DVOA data once again. Plus 17% for running backs against Dallas and plus 1% for running backs against New York. Kind of surprising because you're going to see very quickly we've seen a lot of explosive runs against this New York team. So let's go to rushing now. Actually, even before I do this, let's stay consistent. Let's go to adjusted line yards allowed. First, Dallas 30th in adjusted line yards allowed, 11th in open field yards allowed. So suggesting they're giving up chunks, but not allowing those real explosives. It's like 6 at a time, 8 at a time, things of that nature. New York, on the other hand, 15th in adjusted line yards allowed, 32nd in open field yards allowed. And we're going to see that exact same pattern here. In StatsHub, rushing, advanced, defense. Let me clear all of those filters and scroll over to the explosive rush numbers allowed. 48 explosive runs allowed. That is tied for the second most in the league, but at the highest rate in the league. 15.4% of runs against this New York team go for 10-plus yards. 961 total explosive rushing yards allowed. 961. For some context, let's just do something real quick. Let's go to players. Saquon Barkley leads the league with 749 explosive rushing yards. Running backs against the New York Giants are getting more explosive rushing yards by a fairly considerable amount. That's pretty insane, right? Think of how many of these explosive runs we have seen from Saquon. So Rico Dowdle has not exactly flashed a ton of upside in these explosive runs. In fact, where does he rank here? Only 9 on the season for 115 yards. It's an 8% rate, but it's not like these explosive runs are coming from anyone else on this Dallas team. Maybe CeeDee Lamb will break when he's got 5 of them, but it's not. They're not coming from Zeke. Just one. A 1.7 explosive run rate is insanely bad. My God, is he awful? And Dalvin Cook in 2 games. And how many attempts does he have? 8 carries, not a single one himself. So it's got to be Dowdle. Maybe we finally see some explosive runs from him this week. And let's look at the defenses here. Okay, I want to get rid of that filter. And going back here, let's see where Dallas is in this data. So they have allowed the 4th most explosive runs and a pretty high rate, 7th most. They're just not going for as many yards. So here they are 7th. It's not like this is a bad spot. And whereas we haven't seen the explosive runs from Rico Dowdle, we have from Tyrone Tracy. So let's bring up that data here on the New York side. Tyrone Tracy, 15 explosive runs for 283 explosive rushing yards, 2 of those for touchdowns, a 12.9% explosive run rate. Devin Singletary, not bad himself. We can actually see some explosive runs from this New York team, so I'll have interest there. Quite frankly, if Drew Lock plays, I will have interest in Drew Lock, Tyrone Tracy, Malik Neighbors, Darius Slayton. I'll be interested in a lot of that team. So I'm hoping Drew Lock plays because I don't think many people will be on that with us. That would definitely be a combination where you can use Lock and Tracy, not just because of what he can do in the passing game, but that's one of those where like the dominant correlation there is going to be, what if the offense just does better than what they have done all season and actually put up some points? Maybe because Drew Lock is a lot better than Daniel Jones. Maybe it's just because Dallas sucks on defense, but regardless, I'd be very high on that offense. So that's it for me from this game. Definite interest in some Dowdle overs, particularly if we get a longest rush prop that is not too high. 16.5 is the longest rush for Dowdle. So that's actually higher than I was expecting to see from him. I might just go to the rushing yards there. He's only gone over 16.5 once this entire season, 19 yards against the Eagles. So I won't touch that longest rush for him, but I definitely might touch the over 67.5 rushing yards for Dowdle. Expecting him to kind of be the main guy. Just had 19 for 86 against a Washington team that also struggles with explosive runs. And he didn't break off a 17-yarder against Washington. He just did well enough on average to get to that 86-yard number, well over the 67.5 rushing yards. So I'll have interest there. Let's take a look at what some of Tracy's initial lines are. 64.5 rushing yards for Tracy looks great. And 15.5 longest rush for Tyrone Tracy. That looks quite good to me. 16, 32, 10, 45, 8, 11, 27. So not quite as good as I expected. Maybe I'll just go to the rushing yards for him as well. Not sure, but I will probably have props betting on those guys for sure. So third game. Let's see what we have next. Miami and Green Bay, clearly the best game on paper here on Thanksgiving this season. Let me check in on the chat here. No questions. Reminder, I see like 355 of you watching live now. So number one, appreciate you guys all tuning in. If you are watching live on Twitter, reminder, head over to YouTube. You can watch live and ask questions in here. Shout out to Navari. I see you in here as well, always in here. Also, shout out to Navari, brought up the fact that the Seattle run defense was really improved last week. That helped quite a bit get us off of James Conner, who did not do very well. So shout out to Navari, some real solid analysis from the chat. Always love to see that. All right. Green Bay and Miami. Where do we want to start here? Let's go to the DVOA adjusted fantasy points against data. Nothing special for Green Bay. Slightly good matchup for tight ends. Pretty neutral for running backs. Slightly negative everywhere else. Miami, very bad matchup for quarterbacks. Very bad matchup for wide receiver ones. However, we have made the point kind of all season long. These numbers are misleading a little bit because teams offensively were so uninterested in doing a damn thing when Tua was out. And so to that point where I actually will start this analysis here on StatsHub, it's just kind of looking at their efficiency overall when Tua has actually played. So Tua has played in weeks 1, 2, and then 8 through 12. So 1, 2, 8 through 12 here in StatsHub. Where else around the industry can you sort by any combination of weeks that you want? This is a phenomenal, phenomenal aspect of StatsHub. So let me bring all of this up. 10, 11, and finally we have 12. And now I'm going to clear all of the filters. defense, passing, advanced, and let's look at a couple things here. So first, I'm going to go over to EPA per dropback. And we see, instead of being this big, giant force defensively, Miami, just 18th most favorable. So certainly nothing crazy special there. They've allowed the third highest success rate on pass attempts. They have allowed, let's see, where are they in yards per attempt? Okay, this is slightly better. 24th, so that's actually solid. I'm saying these rankings in terms of favorable to opposing offenses. So 24th here actually means that they have done quite well. Jacksonville up at the top, as they are in pretty much every single passing category. And then when we go to air yards and look at the explosive passes allowed only in these weeks, my guess is they've done fairly well in this regard. Yeah, 19th, so not a ton there. This seems to me to be the case. Like they are doing a very good job of preventing the explosive plays, but as a consequence, they are allowing a fairly high success rate. So not as bad as the DVOA data suggests, but it also maybe points to why tight ends are at plus 11%. They're getting some of those shorter completions, just picking up first down. So we can remember that when we talk about Green Bay, and we can look at which of those Green Bay wide receivers are less likely to hit the big play through the air and more likely to just get those short completions. So let's do exactly that now. Player, advanced. So there are a couple ways we're going to look at this. So here on Green Bay, we are going to first, instead of looking at yards per route run here, I'm going to find success rate for these guys. And Romeo Doubs leads the way, then Tucker Kraft, the tight end, Jaden Reed, 57.7%. So very much a bad spot for Christian Watson. We can pretty much immediately take Christian Watson out of the equation. The next place I'll go here is air yards and just look at the average depth of target for these guys. Christian Watson, again, here, 18.2. So Christian Watson, not the guy that we want this week. Might even take some unders on Christian Watson as well. Let's see. He's at 45.5 receiving yards, 3.5 receptions. I like the under on that 45.5 receiving yards. His longest reception, 21.5. Also have some interest in that. Let's see. Game log for Watson. Which of those looks better? So he's gone over the receiving yards here 3 times, over the longest reception 3 times. So both of them look really good in a horrible, horrible matchup for him. At this point, that's probably my favorite prop. Actually, both of those my favorite props so far. As far as who actually then looks better, Jaden Reed down at 8.4%, quite good. Tucker Kraft 5.2 for his average depth of target. He looks very good. Kraft plus, so this data plus the plus 11% for tight ends makes Tucker Kraft look quite good, actually. So I will say that for this Green Bay passing attack. And now let's look at some of the other stuff. So that's the Miami defense, passing defense, and how the Green Bay passing defense matches up against it. Let's stay with Green Bay here and look at running backs, plus 4% against this Miami team. So a pretty good spot for Josh Jacobs there. Let's look at some of this other data. Miami, in the adjusted line yards allowed, they are 14th and then 19th in open field yards. So pretty neutral in both, same sort of idea as the plus 4%. So let's look at some of this advanced rushing data here in StatsHub. I'll get rid of these filters. Rushing advanced, you know where we're going. We're going to the explosive rushing yards. And where is Miami? Looking at defenses here. Once again, not allowing many explosive plays, 20th in explosive rushing yards allowed. How about in the rates, 11th highest? So, yeah, I mean, honestly, it's just pretty much a neutral spot for Josh Jacobs. That could be good enough. Maybe it's not. We'll see how he projects, and we'll see what the Sims say on him, but nothing special about the matchup whatsoever in any direction for Josh Jacobs. So, let's move on from there. Kind of liking Miami DST, says Stump. That's a pretty interesting way to look at this. It's tough because when a team is funneling those shorter targets, it's a lot less likely the quarterback will try to throw deep or hold the ball to throw deep. On the other hand, if he is determined to make some plays down the field, number one, it means there's coverage back there to maybe pick off the ball. It also could mean if he's holding the ball too long, waiting for something to get open downfield that's not going to get open, now you get some strip sacks and fumbles. So I don't hate it. It's a little bit tough, and Navarre saying wouldn't have it any other way as the official FTN Seahawks correspondent. You have definitely earned that title, my friend. All right, let's see what else we have here. Let's flip over and now evaluate this Green Bay defense. Oh, you know what? We also need to look. Before we do that, let's look at some coverage data for that Green Bay team. Make sure we're not missing anything else really interesting there. So single high and blitz stuff. I almost forgot a lot of stuff there. Single high, Miami, not there. Too high, Miami, not there. How about some man rates? Not there. And zone rates. Do I recall them being up here somewhere? 9th in zone rate. So if I recall correctly, that's also going to point us. That is going to point us away from Christian Watson. The bets against Christian Watson this week are going to be very, very enticing. I can guarantee you that. So real quick, let's take a look at those zone splits for these guys. I remember them very well. I told you guys to play Jayden Reed because of the zone splits. He stunk last week. Apologies there. Josh Jacobs was so damn good. Josh Jacobs had, I think, the second highest GPP score among running backs. And I was just so blinded by Jayden Reed that I didn't go to Jacobs. Jacobs was in the lineup that I remember I told you the Jaden Daniels lineup that the optimizer and the Sims wanted me to play that I never even checked. Jacobs was in that lineup along with Cortland Sutton, scoring 207 fantasy points. Like I said, I would have won everything, but that's in the past. Nothing we can do about it now. All we can do now is continue to fade Christian Watson. Sorry, in that spot. Didn't mean to touch Detroit there. All right, yards per route run here against zone. So you can see why I really liked Jayden Reed, right? 4.0. That's spectacular. He had 3 damn receptions on the opening drive and then didn't touch the ball again. Christian Watson way down here at 1.2, Dobbs 1.1, Tucker Kraft 1.3. When we compare those splits to how they do against man coverage, you can see once again why I was so damn high on Jayden Reed this past week. 3.6 yards per route run against man for Christian Watson. So 3.6 down to 1.2. Romeo Dobbs 2.4 down to 1.2. Tucker Kraft 1.4 to 1.3. Pretty neutral for him. Jayden Reed 1.4 to 4.0 with this zone. Maybe it's worth going right back to him. Again, he has a low average depth of target, so maybe we will see a bunch of Jayden Reed, and it's worth going right back to him. But certainly like Tucker Kraft this week. Let's look now at the Green Bay defense and see what we can find for Miami. Both of the guys that I just totally whiffed on this past week in this game, Jayden Reed and Tyreek Hill. And it's such a bummer too, because let me bring up the DVOA adjusted fantasy points against data real quick, just to take a look at this. New England plus 20% wide receiver ones, plus 44% for wide receiver twos. So why I didn't make a rule that instead of just locking in Tyreek Hill, it was make sure you have at least one of Tyreek or Waddle, I could not tell you, but would have been a much, much bigger week. But again, nothing we can do about that now. Good question here about context on the wide receiver ones, wide receiver two, and wide receiver three designations. Most often, wide receiver threes are going to be the slot guy, but we have a very complex process for how we define these and how we classify these guys. We're looking at everything from how often are these guys getting the priority targets, whether it's in the red zone, looking at first read target share, looking at how many designed targets each is getting. We're also looking at, we're trying to find things of like, how often is the opponent trying to take this specific wide receiver out of the play, whether it's, an easy example is if you knew nothing about the Cincinnati wide receiver production and all you did was tune in to one game and you see play after play, they are putting an extra safety over the top of Jamar Chase. I don't care where he's lining up. You're going to be able to very easily say that guy's the wide receiver 1. How do I know? Because the opponent is putting the most attention on that guy. That makes him the wide receiver 1. So it's not always cut and dry. And to that point, when an offense doesn't have the most cut and dry wide receiver 1, wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3s, like Chicago, for example, Rome Odunze is who we're classifying as the wide receiver 3, but there have been weeks where he looked like the primary target. So he's not going to be treated by a defense the way Naylor is going to be treated in that Minnesota offense when defenses are putting all their attention on Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison. So we have to kind of parse through that stuff, but it's a great question. Stump also chiming in, Jonnu Smith, hot hand might be low on. We'll take a look at that. Appreciate you, Hector, chiming in with awesome stuff. I hope you guys really appreciate this show. This is the fun one to do, honestly. We're already an hour in, so trying to really go quick to get through the rest of this. I didn't even realize we were an hour in. Time flies on this show. KJ, appreciate you tuning in. We're not going to do just standard fantasy questions, because if I did that, we'd be here for 2 hours. So I will say you can chime in in the FTN Fantasy Discord channel. Quite frankly, those are the guys you want answering your fantasy questions. I don't do a whole lot of fantasy football myself. Appreciate you, Stump. Let's finish this analysis. We got to get into the Green Bay defense and figure out which Miami guys. I also probably shouldn't waste time complaining about the mistakes I made last week, but to each their own. All right, let's see. Do I need to get rid of some advanced filtering? I don't even remember what was here, so I'm just going to go ahead and get rid of it. Receiving, advanced defense, standard stuff here. Let's go to the single high rates. And once again, we are looking for Green Bay here. So 14th in single high, nothing there. How about man rates? I don't believe there's anything here. 27th in man, so maybe we are going to find them heavy in zone rates. So 7th highest zone usage here from this Green Bay team. So let's go take a look at how these wide receivers are doing against zone coverage for Miami. Player, advanced filtering, receiving, coverages, zone. You guys know the drill by now. Let's apply all of that, and let's go to this Miami team. I kind of think Jonnu Smith is going to look pretty good here. Could be wrong. I'm also going to go, let's see, it was weeks 1, 2, and then 8 through 12. I don't give a flying about how these wide receivers did when Tua was out, so I want to get rid of all of that data, make sure it's not skewing anything here. I have already given the feedback of I wish it didn't the page didn't reset every time I clicked in a new one, and that it would let me just select them all and then it would do. But lots of things on the list. So for the moment, we have to just deal with that. 2.2 yards per route run for Tyreek Hill, 2.1 for Devon Achane. So obviously they are liking those screens against zone. 1.9 for Waddle. John only 1.6. Mostert up at 1.8 as well. So a much more compact pack here, I believe, is what we're going to find. Let me just go to man just to make sure that that's exactly what we see. So I'm surprised that Tyreek doesn't go higher. Tyreek absolutely shredded man coverage a season ago. So Jonnu actually doing better against man coverage in the zone. That's surprising. Jalen Waddle, Jalen Waddle's the only guy who actually sees a noticeable bump from zone coverage. So that's worth keeping in mind. Let's go back to the DVOA adjusted fantasy points against data. What did I just click? Apology. Oh, that's because I was already there. My fault, guys. Appreciate you letting me know, Stump. I will go right back to that Miami data after we take a look at this DVOA data. So I need Green Bay here. Plus 12% for tight ends, minus 5% for wide receiver ones, minus 12% for wide receiver twos. Kind of just a bad matchup for everybody, again, except for tight end. So maybe it is Jonnu Smith, but as I bring up this tab once again here on StatsHub, so weeks 1 through 12, or weeks 1, 2, and then 8 through 12, these are all of the Tua weeks. This is yards per route run against man. As I flip this to zone, you'll see the only guy who goes up is Jalen Waddle. Most of them pretty much at the same number. Tyreek identical. Achane barely went up. Mostert barely went up. Jonnu Smith actually went down a little bit. So nothing crazy here. I think this is another one where we just kind of go by whatever whatever the field is not doing, we can go ahead and do. But before we totally say that, let me get rid of these filters. And let's just make sure that we're not missing anything in the explosive department here in the passing game for Miami. Oh, this is not what I want. I want defenses. So Green Bay is way down, 25th most deep completions allowed. So they also are doing a very good job of not allowing those deep balls. 28th. So tough spot for Tyreek Hill. Jonnu Smith, Jalen Waddle, Devon Achane in the passing game seems to make the most sense to me right now. Let me go to the advanced tab and let me just see. Is this another one of those instances where it means that their success rate allowed has been really high, or are they just doing quite well against the pass? And it looks like it's the latter. 23rd in success rate allowed. So Green Bay has just been kind of a force defensively, even if you don't totally think of them that way. As I mentioned, negative 1% for opposing running backs. So let's take a look at the running games allowed. And Navari asked me, the one that bugs me is when there's not a whole lot of change when you're switching between sorry, I got confused by one of the other comments. So when we're flipping there between the zone and man, you're not seeing a big change there in these yards per outrun data, which again, like sometimes that kind of uncertainty and the fact that there isn't this obvious answer isn't a bad thing. It just means let's see what the field does. If they are heavily on one guy, if they are heavily to Jonnu Smith or heavily away from Jonnu Smith, we can then say, hey, you know what? There's actually nothing really pointing us to any of these guys. It could be any of them that produces. Let's just play the ownership game. So I like when the story is a little bit clearer, but there are also times where we can really benefit from the story not being clear. Like if the story is clear that, hey, this is a Jonnu Smith matchup, and then Jonnu Smith is 45%, that can obviously be a more difficult decision to then make. So it's not all bad when it's confusing like this. But let's go look at some of this rushing stuff now for this Miami team. So let me go to the adjusted line yards. And where is Green Bay? We can also look at where Miami is here. Actually, we already did look at Miami. So Green Bay 17th and then 23rd in open field yards allowed in the running game. So maybe we'll find some explosive running stuff that we can use for Achane, maybe Mostert, maybe Jalen Wright. Also want to look at whether Mostert was more involved this past week in the running game than the week prior, where I believe he had 0 carries in response to a fumble in the game prior. So let's see if he was brought back in. I think I remember him getting a red zone rush attempt at the very least. But before we do that, let's look at this rushing stuff. So explosive runs allowed. Green Bay 15th. Maybe the rate is higher. Obviously, they've played a lot of positive game scripts, so teams maybe haven't been able to run the ball a ton against them. 15th, so not really. It's just not that great of a matchup on the ground. I think we'll probably see a decent pass rate, and we'll probably see Miami trying to throw short with these screens. So Achane, Jonnu Smith, and then when they throw, it might be some Jalen Waddle stuff over the middle. So biggest takeaway here is like there's just kind of nothing in all of this data pointing to any Miami guys over the others. Final thing I want to look at here are either of these teams blitzing a ton. If they're not, we don't even need to bother looking at that data. But let's see. Yeah, Miami is 10th. That's not really high enough to take anything away. Green Bay way down at 28th. So maybe let's look at some of these guys when there's no blitz on. Maybe we get some semblance of an answer from that. Play situation versus blitz false. And we're going to bring up Miami here. That's not what I wanted to hit. And once again, like everyone is in this exact same pack. 2.0 to 1.6 doesn't tell us a damn thing about them. It was Miami who had a somewhat high 10th highest blitz rate. So might as well, just for the sake of it, take a look at who on Green Bay is producing the most against the blitz, but also not a ton here. Unless I see like a big number for Jaden Reed. Okay, 3.3. So I will probably be back in on Jaden Reed, maybe even more so than Tucker Kraft, who's stuck down here at 1.5. And maybe that means like we see more design stuff for Jaden Reed. In fact, let's take a look. This past matchup for Green Bay, San Francisco, if they hit a really low blitz rate, if they have a really low blitz rate, I should say, maybe that is something we missed, something I missed, I should say, last week, and would explain why Jaden Reed did not end up having the game that I expected him to have. So let's take a look there. Anything that we can see, I've got to refresh that. Passing, pressure, defense, and where is San Francisco? 30th. Okay, we've got ourselves an answer. Maybe that's why Jaden Reed did so poorly last week, and I just flat out missed it. So with the higher blitz rate from Miami, 9th in blitz rate, I will be back in on Jaden Reed in a big way this week. Let's see. Good question here. Is there outside wide receiver or slot wide receiver production on the defense tab? Yes. So the way that you do this, we looked at it a little bit earlier with Amon-Ra St. Brown. We're going to use the advanced filter. So I'm going to go to receiving, advanced filtering, receiving, route location, all the way on the right here, and then alignment. You can choose wide or slot. So if we just want to look at slot, for example, you can go here. Now, you can look at this a number of ways. My favorite, as you guys have seen, yards per target is the way that I'm going to typically look at this. So Cleveland allowing the highest yards per target out of the slot. You can also just look at total yards. You can look actually advanced and look at yards per route run. So again, Cleveland 9.5. Tampa really struggling, 9.4. You can also scroll all the way to the right for some more advanced data. EPA per target out of the slot. Cleveland once again, Dallas, Indianapolis. So yes, you can do this to see how defenses have performed against either wide receivers out wide or in the slot, or you can also look at individual players and how they have done out of the slot or out wide, things of that nature. So like here we can see the leader this season in yards per route run out wide. You're going to get some funky stuff. T. Higgins at 4.3. He has been a monster this year. Terry McLaurin, 3.9 as well. So, yeah. Actually, I think this was slot data, wasn't it? Yeah, T. Higgins and Terry McLaurin dominating out of the slot. Sidebar, why does Terry McLaurin only have 55 routes run out of the slot when he's averaging 3.9 yards per route run? And if we look at route location out wide, let's get rid of the slot. And now look at Terry McLaurin. So 3.9 yards per route run out wide, 2.4 out wide, 3.9 in the slot. And he's running like 5 times more routes out wide. Come on, man. Use the guy in the right way, which doesn't mean exclusively out of the slot. Like this is one of the better out wide receivers in the league, but use him the way teams use Justin Jefferson, the way the Bengals use Jamar Chase. Get this guy moving all over the place and giving him some more free releases out of the slot to create some bigger plays that way. Just a frustrating side note, but appreciate the question there, Cod. Anything that comes to mind that works for a 3-game or more than normal slates? Touched on Monty Gibbs pair. Yeah, that's a good question. I think we might run out of time to get to that Las Vegas, Kansas City game, which kind of is not a very fun game to talk about anyway. So maybe a good thing. I'll do a brief dive into those, but we probably won't go in as in-depth as we did for these 3 teams. It's also one of those things where like I can very easily do that on Friday morning and just drop some notes in the channel there. So as far as 3-game slates go, like this is obviously like a very convenient thing to say because we just launched these contest sims, but these are the types of slates where contest sims will really, really be the most impactful. We'll also see that when we get to playoff time, where so much about these smaller slates, you guys have heard me say it before, make sure that each decision you make affects the next decision you make, or that each decision you make is remembering the decisions you've already made. So using this like Montgomery and Gibbs pairing example, if you have already chosen Montgomery and Gibbs, because it's not likely that either one of them has that like massive 40-point game if the other guy is also scoring touchdowns, you're kind of hoping that they both get 20 DraftKings points, something like that. That in and of itself says that there aren't two other running backs who are getting this massive score. That 20 is great for both of those guys, even at their price tags. So when you make that decision, it affects who the other running backs are that you're using. Like, you probably don't want to then just go and try to jam in Josh Jacobs or something like that. Maybe it means that you're more likely to use wide receiver in the flex. But as I talk about all this, you can probably already tell, like, this is the kind of thing that the contest sims are going to do really well. What you can do is, let's say you want to test what this pairing looks like and what lineups should look like when you have those two. Lock both of those guys in, run 10 lineups, run 50 lineups, whatever, and then run the sims on all those and just kind of notice the pattern. Which of the lineups that you just generated have the highest ROI, the highest expected win rate? What are the patterns in those lineups? You can look at, like, which stack is it using? Maybe because those guys are pricey, it's giving you a lot of Drew Lock stacks or something like that. Again, I don't know that Drew Lock is starting. It's wishful thinking on my part at the moment, in large part just because I also love seeing the Dallas Cowboys lose on Thanksgiving. That is obviously more likely if it is Drew Lock instead of Tommy DeVito. But you also see things like, okay, maybe wide receivers are consistently in the flex in the lineups that are simming the best with both of those guys. Maybe it's a tight end in the flex. And so you'll see, like, these hidden correlations that the sims pick up on and understand a lot better than we can, at least on an intuitive level. So another good question. We're already an hour and 15 in. I got to make sure this doesn't last 90 minutes. So let's jump into that last game, Las Vegas and Kansas City, and just see what we can find here. Anything just jumping out at us. Again, probably not going to go too deep in this. Kansas City, good first place to start. Awful matchup for everybody except plus 24% for tight ends, plus 19% for wide receiver threes. So let me do a very quick search on who we have as the wide receiver 3 on that team. I think it's going to be Turner. Is that right? Let me see. Oops, I'm in the wrong spot. Las Vegas. Oh, okay, so we had DJ Turner listed as the wide receiver 2, so that would be Trey Tucker as the wide receiver 3. That actually is somewhat interesting. So maybe a Trey Tucker kind of night, but obviously Brock Bowers at plus 24%. That is where we should immediately look to in Las Vegas. Also right here, quarterbacks doing pretty well, running backs doing very well, tight ends absolutely destroying the Las Vegas Raiders. So could be a major, major Travis Kelce game on national TV. My guess is Taylor Swift will be there and people are going to go crazy over that. So as if we needed to play into a Taylor Swift at the game type of narrative, that's a little bit unfortunate, but Kelce couldn't have a better matchup here than he does with Las Vegas. I honestly, I don't feel like I need to do a whole lot more with this game. Terrible rushing matchup for Las Vegas. Not like they can run the ball regardless, but let me see. Where is Kansas City here? 5th in adjusted line yards allowed, 1st in open field yards allowed. So awful, awful rushing matchup. Las Vegas 10th in adjusted line yards allowed, but 28th in open field yards allowed. So I will take a look at that here in StatsHub. Let's look at some rushing stuff in the explosive rushing data against Las Vegas. Maybe this is going to be a good spot for Isaiah Pacheco's return. Something like Pacheco's longest rush might be interesting. Not sure yet. Let's take a look. Over here in the explosive rushing data. So Las Vegas not allowing a ton of long runs. 21st here, way down there. But my guess is that they're going to show up higher on this list. 14th in explosive rushing yards allowed. It's actually nothing crazy by any means. That open field yards allowed numbers a little bit surprising as a result, but fine spot for Pacheco. Really not a whole lot. Travis Kelce, Brock Bowers, maybe Trey Tucker. Seems like that's the way to go from this final game. I think that will do it for this show. Appreciate you guys tuning in as always. One final reminder here, 25% off. BKVIP is the promo code that'll get you NFL VIP Plus or VIP Plus. Let you do all of this great analysis with StatsHub, finding these edges that other people aren't finding. I've talked about this before, but this is such a a fantastic place or a fantastic way to find advantages that others are finding. When you look at like a Vegas totals or something like that, and you know that an offense as a whole is in a good spot, you are not finding any mismatch that others aren't finding. You have to get into the nitty gritty of these stats and these splits to find the matchup advantages that others aren't on. And that's where the true edge lies. So this StatsHub it really is like a cheat code for us. And we have been absolutely dominating both the props and the DFS streets ever since we really started maximizing our StatsHub advantage. And now that we have the contest sims, we're in a position to do even more of that. Before I jump out of here, Kyle asking, do I have a favorite place to look at for offensive line, defensive line matchups for run and pass plays? Yes. First place is adjusted line yards. You're not going to find anything better than this. So you can look at adjusted line yards allowed first for the defense. Then you can flip over to the offensive tab. I don't even use the offensive tab a ton just because I know what the running back's typical production looks like. So I just want to know how much better or worse is he going to do than his typical output. So I spend most of my time here on the defensive adjusted line yards allowed page, but then also in StatsHub. Remember that offensive line and defensive line performance is so tied to the quarterback too in the scheme that I don't like just like looking at the personnel or the player grades or anything like that. I want to look at pressure and adjusted sack percentage, things of that nature. So I like to just go passing, and the pressure tab, you can start with defense. So looking at sack percentage, adjusted sack rate, looking at pressure rates. I like looking at time to pressure. So let's do this right here. So like Atlanta gets there fairly quickly. Minnesota gets there fairly quickly. Average time to throw, also a pretty good one to look at. And then you just compare that to like a lot of the pressure rates. So Cleveland, highest pressure rate, really solid sack rate. They're getting that pressure quickly. And they're doing so without blitzing a ton, right? And so sometimes it's like you'll see a team's getting a decent amount of pressure, but they're doing so because they're blitzing a ton. That's New England, right? So New England, highest blitz rate, not pressuring as much. So actually, that's not correct. I think I need to refresh this. I already know that the highest blitz rates are Minnesota and Tampa Bay. So every now and then this times out, but let's go to defense and pressure. So let's look at this again. Whoops. So yeah, Atlanta, Minnesota. Now we get the blitz rate, 39.8% for Minnesota. There's Tampa Bay, as I said. So you look at these really high blitz rates, and the pressure rates therefore aren't quite as impressive. This 33.3% pressure rate is quite good. Let's find Cleveland, only 12th in blitz percentage, really high pressure rate. The fact that their offense has been so incredibly bad for a lot of the season, and the fact that they've actually given up a lot of explosive runs has really hurt this defense. In a lot of the ways, they have been as effective as they were a season ago, at least when it comes to creating pressure and doing so without sending extra rushers. So you can look at this from the defensive tab and the offensive tab. This, to me, is by far the best way to evaluate offensive line and defensive line matchups. Final note here. Contest Sims article should be out tomorrow morning, Wednesday morning, and the tutorial video, I'm guessing, will also be out sometime tomorrow. I'd like to maybe wait and actually get some ownership data into the optimizer so we can kind of look at some things and ask some questions together. If I don't have that, I might just record it in the morning and use last week's data. I'm also actually very curious. I also, before I actually record the tutorial video, I'd like for people to read the tutorial article and submit some questions for me to answer. Let me know, hey, I want this question answered in the tutorial video. I'm interested in hearing you elaborate more on this or that, whatever the case is. So I will probably actually wait a little bit on the tutorial video for some feedback to hear what you guys want me to cover most in that. So with that, I will see you guys tomorrow, 5:30 Eastern, Two Gun and myself for the Millie, breaking down the rest of this Thanksgiving slate, both from a prop perspective and from a DFS perspective. We will have ownership projections and GPP scores by then. See you guys. Thanks once again.